short amount anyway.
No, I'm drawing this thing out tonight.
Dylan's like, I'm making up for missing the last one. All right. Cool. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order, 6 o'clock. Welcome to the Woodfin Planning Board meeting, June 7th, 2022. So first off, we got the approval of the agenda. We were all sent the agenda over the weekend. Unless there is any thing that needs to be changed, we just need to vote to approve it.
I move that we approve the agenda for tonight.
Awesome.
Second.
Second. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
3. Sweet. On to C. So then in the same vein, the approval of the minutes from our last meeting, May 3rd, were also in the packet.
I move the approval of the minutes from the last meeting.
Perfect.
May 3rd.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Now we're going to open this meeting up to public comment. You will address the board, sign up with the town clerk 15 minutes prior. Ryan, is anybody on Facebook or on the virtual?
No,
Okay, so then there's nobody in our meeting. So I will open it up and close it at the same time.
You don't have to open it up. We can just move
All right,
on.
we're just going to skip right on through that one then. Feel like Ted Lasso. All right, so now to new business. Our item tonight's public hearing, ordinance on text amendments. So Adrian, if you want to lead us through our Chapter 40 steep slope code.
So as you know, we adopted a steep slope ordinance in February, and we've had a couple of months to kind of get used to that, put it into practice, and we've noticed some changes that we need to make relevant to the town of Woodfin, but also there's some issues with compliance with state law that we want to clean up. There's a marked up version and a clean version in your packet. I'm going to reference those as we go along so you can kind of see where we are and what I'm talking about. So the first section I'm going to cover is applicability. In the marked up version, that's page 1 and 2, and the clean version, it's page 2. Let me get there too. So we took that section and we split it up into 2 separate sections. So there's a new section 2 called determining steep slope areas, and section 3 is now applicability. The language in section 2 is just relocated from a previous section, in the same language from a previous section of the ordinance for determining slope, calculation of average natural slope. So that's essentially what's in section 2 now. And then we've also clarified the applicability, what triggers the steep slope ordinance, and that is the average elevation and the average natural slope of a lot. So we've added that language to clarify how this is applied to a lot. We've also added language in section 3, applicability now, to require communal infrastructure of subdivisions to be regulated by the steep slope regulations standards. And we've clarified the exemptions of the steep slope ordinance, and those are individual septic systems and expansion to existing structures only if they're less than 500 square feet.
What would a communal infrastructure be?
Like roads and utilities and
Okay.
things relevant to subdivision construction. Moving on to the definition section, and that's page 2, 3, and 4 of both versions of the ordinance. We just made some minor changes to this section. We removed best management practice. That was in context of the credits you could get for different things, and I'll get to that in a minute. We removed those. That's not relevant. And this definition is not relevant to the ordinance anymore because of the removal of those. And we also removed the definition for existing grade, which we are referring to as average natural slope, which is explained in that new section 2. We simplified cut slope and fill slope. They were pretty wordy, superfluous language, and we just consolidated those down to one sentence. We added definitions for downhill sections. It's relevant to the screening standards of the ordinance. Planar surface definition was already in the ordinance, but it was in the main text of the ordinance, so we just took that from there and put it in the definition section where it should be. And we added the definition for building and the definition for structure so that we could add separate standards for buildings and structures. And we made some minor clarifications to development, land disturbing activity, lot, and revegetation. Just minor changes, didn't change the substance of the definition. Remove a word here or there. Those are the changes to the definition section.
I have a couple questions. Do we have any idea in Woodfin how much of our land is steep slope?
I'm working on that. I don't have it.
You think it's gonna be quite a bit?
It's a good amount, yeah.
My next question is, it looked like everything was related a lot to, individuals building on lots. So where do townhomes fit in? And do you think, would a multi-unit complex of any type even consider a steep slope, or are they probably gonna avoid it?
Well, our standards are gonna limit that based on what we're allowing 2 dwelling units per lot.
I know.
And so that's gonna really,
So they probably wouldn't even be able to do.
and then there's only 2 principal buildings allowed on an individual
Right.
lot, so it's.
Well, when I read that,
It'll
that's why I
deter
wondered about townhomes.
large development.
And one other question about plots. Realtors here may know the answer to this, but if a person is wanting to enlarge their plot so that they can, qualify for a different approach, can they take an adjacent property that may have been designated as a separate plot and combine it somehow with Register of Deeds? How does that work? Can they enlarge their plot?
If 2 ways to do it.
Right.
If they own both plots separately, for
Right.
instance, when they purchased, they were being sold separate as an attempt to maybe sell one to build on. And you've got somebody that says, I'll buy them separate, so it's already got 2 pins in the
Right.
Buncombe County GIS. If it's like that, you can go to Buncombe County Register of Deeds and apply to have them combined,
Okay.
to make your plot larger.
Okay.
The other way to do it is if it is your neighbor, and let's say that 2 houses are on either side, and this was an empty lot in a subdivision, then sometimes these 2 people will approach this person and buy half of their lot, so they extend it by 50% or
Right.
something. So there are ways to do it.
Can you do it if there's a road through it? Can you go get?
It depends on if the road's private, state maintained, still if you own both sides.
Okay.
For instance, I had a client that closed a house in Madison County in Marshall, and the 6 acres was separated 2.5 on one side of the road and 4.5 on the other, but it was all one pin.
Right.
It just happened to be that the state road went through it.
I'm sorry, I can just think of a lot of ways people are gonna try to manipulate.
Well, even if they combine the lot, they're still gonna it's gonna be one lot, so.
I know, but they could, their slope and things can be combined, you're averaging a lot of things. So couldn't they, by averaging, actually change, and the amount of land they can, impervious, is that the word, structure and things that they can put down, depends on size of the lot. But anyhow, I'm sorry,
Yeah, I think-
I just have neighbors that try all kinds of things, so I'm trying to.
One way to think about it is if you have 2 lots.
Right.
Both lots are allowed to have, say, 2,000 square feet of disturbance on each, and they each are allowed 2 dwelling units, so 4 units total. So if one person wants to have a larger house with more disturbance and they combine it,
Yeah,
you're still not gonna result in more disturbance or more impervious square footage based on the allowance. More than likely, it's gonna be less.
Oh, really?
Than what could have
Okay.
been under 2
Okay.
development applications.
okay.
But, okay. kind of lost me there, because I think I get your point. It's like, if you're building on a very steep slope, right? And there's a lot below you that's very flat or doesn't fall under steep slope. You combine those two lots. By combining those two lots, are you able to do more on the steep slope now that you've added to that plot of land? I think is what you're getting.
Well, yes, I hadn't thought about below, but yes, I was thinking, I just see a lot of building.
Right, so if you have you buy the side of a mountain and you can't build very much on it because it's a steep slope ordinance, but you also buy the meadow down below.
Or even
Just-
adjacent is what I was
or
really
adjacent,
thinking.
yeah.
What I was really thinking.
You know, if you're looking at the averages, can you recalc that then to, get around the steep slope ordinance in some regard?
You don't get around it, but you can manipulate it.
So
Sure.
the short answer is probably not, because we're going to apply the steep slope standards only to the portion of the lot that's above 2220.
Right.
So we're gonna look at, or 2200, whatever it is.
2,100.
So we're only gonna look at the
Yeah.
portion of the property
22.
that is above that and over 20%
Right.
natural slope.
So in theory you could, but it's like a severe edge case, I guess, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and if you have the flat property, I mean, I guess somebody may want to capitalize on a view or something like that,
Sure.
but the developable property is going to be down low, so.
I think the cost of developing on the steep slope at points of permits and things like that is what's gonna hinder the developers.
Right, from
I mean, you might have a
development.
single family that wants to take advantage of a view, but,
Yeah, I'm just overall curious. I mean, it's an interesting point. That,
Yeah.
like, how can you fudge the numbers by acquiring land?
I think it's absolutely wonderful we have a steep slope ordinance, as Adrian knows I've been wanting one forever, so I'm just glad, and I think what you're suggesting for changes are.
Yeah, generally, the purpose of this amendment was to first and foremost clarify the ordinance and make it more defensible in the event that somebody wants to challenge it. And we're already starting to get people to try to challenge it a little bit.
We are.
Yeah, and then also to make it more Woodfin specific, like what specifically has Woodfin struggled with that we want to make sure that we address? And so this update also attempts to kind of fold that in a little bit. So it's no less rigorous. The only thing we added that maybe gives, well, actually it doesn't. So we did add an exemption for small additions under 500 square feet. But the way the code is written now, it pretty much exempted any structure that was built before the ordinance was adopted. So what we're doing now is we're saying you're not exempt, but we will give you this little addition. It's because you may have a home that was built at a time when, it might be an older home that didn't contemplate, covered parking or having a washer and dryer or a bathroom on the main level. So having a small addition or an opportunity for a small addition, pretty much should address any of those
Right.
modernization.
How many of those
needs.
can you do, though? Like, if I do one this year, but I want to do another one
Yeah,
next year.
I thought about that too. You can, in theory, do that. I think it's unlikely that people would.
We're just having fun with a bunch of edge cases over here.
How many
We
things,
do that too, we do that too, so.
how many steep slope developments are still out there, though, that applied before the February date? Just one? Two? Two, that's great.
Two that
Yeah, two.
are very much in limbo. We don't know what the future of these projects are.
I'm sorry, and who are you? I might have.
I'm sorry.
I-
I'm Shannon Tuck, I'm the new town manager.
Okay. I probably met you just with the masks, I don't know. That's cool.
it's all right, we got it all on recording.
Yeah. Okay.
It's all right, I asked what
We're going to
infrastructure
do
was.
this person is jumping over the microphone. I'll let Adrian pick that.
All right, moving on to the development standards of the ordinance. Pages 4 through 8 of the marked up version and 4 through 6 of the clean version. So here we are talking about the density. I've gone over this so much today, I thought we'd already talked about this. So here we are where we're amending it to say no single lot can contain more than 2 dwelling units. And previously it said to principal structures. So we removed that language and replaced it with 2 dwelling units. And then we added separate requirements for buildings and structures. So you can have 2 principal buildings on a lot.
Right.
There's no limit on the amount of accessory structures you can have, but we did add a height limitation of 20 feet for those. So that's outhouses, accessory buildings,
Well,
maybe outhouses.
Maybe.
Things like that, retaining walls, so we're limiting those to 20 feet or less. And we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end if you would like. And then I was talking about the best management practices in the definition section, that we removed that. That was relevant to the intensity bonus. So that was if you did more grading or you provided more screening, you could get a bonus on the amount of disturbance and impervious surface you were allowed. But in looking at that, some of those options for the intensity bonus were pretty subjective, and state statute requires that any ministerial decision be based on objective standards. And so we thought it best to just remove those in their entirety at this time. So we took those out, and which referenced the best management practice, so we removed that definition. The geotechnical assessment language, that's still triggered if the lot, if there's a 35% slope. So we just clarified, removed some superfluous language from that and some subjectivity that was in that provision as well. For the screening, we've just clarified what the screening requirements are applicable to. So that's new buildings and structures. Modification to existing buildings exceeding 50% of the appraised value, and expansions exceeding that 500 square foot or 20 linear feet. We've also added a requirement that tree protection fencing be used for any trees that are designated to be preserved, so we make sure that that happens. And then the last thing we changed in the main standards section or the last 2 things, were the addition of a maintenance plan requirement if there would be revegetation of artificial slopes, with provisions of for replacement of dead vegetation if there's over 50% mortality. This section also included an option for an alternative landscaping plan to be submitted by a landscaping architect to allow for removal of vegetation from designated preserved areas. Back to the subjectivity thing, that was not consistent with state law, so we decided to remove that option. Moving on to the application submittal penalties and permit sections, the last few sections of the ordinance, page 8 in marked up version and 6 in the clean version. We basically removed a lot of this language because it was redundant to what's provided in the zoning ordinance, which is where we find that authority. So we did leave the language clarifying that steep slope review is part of the zoning permit process. We clarified that the information needed to complete that review has to be submitted on the site plan with the steep slope review. But we removed the majority of the language in the penalty section and just referenced the zoning ordinance because that language is already found there. And along those same lines, the last 3 sections of the ordinance, the fees, the completeness review, and permit expiration, all that's found in the zoning ordinance, so we just removed those sections in their entirety. So that is the amendments that we're recommending. There were a few items that I wanted to revisit in case you wanted to discuss them further. I mentioned that we removed the intensity bonuses because they were too subjective. We can offer intensity bonuses as long as the language that goes along with them is objective enough for a staff person to use, numeric, whatever it needs to be. There's no discretion involved. So we can revisit that if you think that's something that we should keep in the ordinance. We also wanted to talk about what you thought about the height limit for accessory structures. We set that at 20 feet. Don't know if maybe we should bring that down a little bit further to 10 or 12 feet. So that's something we want to discuss with you. And
How's that measured?
It's described in the ordinance, it's from the grade to the highest point of the structure.
The highest point?
It depends on whether it's a building or.
Yeah, like if it's a shed building.
It's from the average to the tallest peak, and if it's a structure, it's the highest point, whatever is the highest end.
Okay.
So an easy way to think of it is a structure, so anything that's got 4 walls and a roof is gonna be building.
Sure.
And we measure height, looking at the average of the, I forget how it, 2 walls or something
Yeah, it's
like
the
that.
short wall and the tall wall, and then you average those, and that
Yeah.
gives you average height for
That's-
the building. But
If
for
it's
the,
If it's a structure, what we did, and this is new, so, for a structure, you're thinking of like a gazebo or a shed or a retaining wall. These are all structures that are not buildings. So we're just looking at whatever is the highest point
Here it is.
of that structure. So
From
if it's a
the
gazebo-
lowest grade or,
So if it's, the highest end, I think is what we
it's right
said.
here.
From the ground level to the tallest end of the structure. So whatever, so if you're a gazebo on a slope,
right?
right, we're gonna measure from the low side to the highest point of the gazebo. If you're a retaining wall that's running down, and it's maybe 2 feet on one end, but 18 feet on the other.
Is the
we're
language
gonna-
actually reflective of it being the lowest, the lowest?
It says, structure
Ground
height shall
level.
be measured from the ground level to the tallest end of the structure, so we're looking for whatever the tallest end of the.
But the ground level could be any number of, ground level is just wherever the ground is, right?
Yeah, but how would you identify the tallest end if you're not looking at the lowest ground level?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
I think, like, if you built into the slope for a gazebo or a carport or whatever, you go up the slope 7 feet, your gazebo might only come off 4 or 5 feet there because your slope's so far down here that.
That's my question. It's like you buy a gazebo or you put up a gazebo and it's 12 feet tall, right? The highest point of that gazebo is 12 foot tall because the gazebo is 12 foot tall. But you can measure it.
Well, if it's on a slope, right,
Right.
you've got a flat bottom to your gazebo, and if you're on a slope, you're gonna have to build a foundation for that gazebo. And so we're gonna pick the lowest part of that foundation, because that's part of the structure, so it's gonna go to the tallest peak.
No, I get what you're saying. I just want to make sure. When I hear the language, I don't register that that's
Okay.
what we're
well,
actually talking about.
We'll work on that, maybe we can clean that up a little
Yeah.
bit.
Maybe I'm just being thick.
It's
though.
gonna cause people to rent a lot of earth movers to dig out that wall.
So, but to Adrian's point, we debated, she and I kind of debated, like, what is the appropriate height of that structure? So this gets back to one of the main goals of this amendment is to kind of make it more Woodfin specific. So there's been a fair amount of concern expressed about these very visible retaining walls as one structure that has created some concern. So is 20 feet the right maximum? A typical structure that isn't a retaining wall, such as a carport or a gazebo, you're probably not gonna be over 12, 15 feet tall. So is it more appropriate to go for a number like that? Retaining walls can also help minimize disturbance. So do we want to limit them more than 20 feet? That's the give and take. So we wanted to just.
I think if we have a 20-foot retaining wall, we need to have some sort of like built-in trigger that says you gotta cover it with 80% of some sort of vegetation growth. Like it's Wrigley Field or something.
Yeah, so there's 2 ways to screen a retaining wall. One is to do like a green wall.
Right.
Like put a structure up and let vines climb up it. Only some vines can have the vascular strength to get to, above 10, 12 feet. And most of those are not native to this area.
Right.
Except
Yeah, I
kudzu,
do.
which we don't really want
We
to,
don't
the
want
ones
to-
that can do that, we don't want to permit. So then you're looking at vegetation like trees and shrubs, which we can add screening requirements to retaining walls using trees and shrubs, but it's gonna be tough to say, it's, at what point do these trees and shrubs cover the wall, 80% of
Right.
the wall, at maturity, after 5 years?
Yeah, because it's definitely time, right?
Yeah.
You're still gonna
Just-
look at an ugly wall for 10 years.
Does it make sense to break out the definition between like an accessory structure and a retaining wall and differentiate those things, right?
We can. If you want special standards just to, it's tough. It's one of those, it's like the 7th grade English class, where all buildings are structures, but not all structures are buildings.
Right.
So it's kind of like a retaining wall is a structure, but it's not, there are other structures too. So if you want different development standards for retaining walls, then it could make sense to do that.
Yeah.
But we could, if the main concern is screening, then we can add under screening requirements, that part of the steep slope ordinance, we could add something about screening retaining walls.
Yeah. I guess just getting back to screening and like realistically, like what can you actually screen at a certain height, right? And then you start thinking about like terracing instead of, 20, 40 foot.
Yeah.
A retaining wall sticks out of my head right now.
Terracing's nice, but it usually creates more disturbance, so that's usually
Yeah,
the
the
catch
disturbance in the
22.
space,
Hmm.
Well, if you have some great epiphanies,
I think we go with what's proposed. I mean, you guys, we always have the ability to change the ordinance that way. I mean, I'm sure you don't want that to happen too often, but
well, at a minimum, it sounds like there's interest in adding maybe some screening
Separate.
requirements for retaining walls.
Yeah.
So we can do that moving forward.
I think what I'm hung up on is the difference between like a structure and a retaining wall. And I know like all lumps into the same definition, but again, I just have this retaining wall in my mind that I'm thinking about right now. And how we would never allow a structure that big where this potential retaining wall is, right? But we allow a wall. So I guess in my mind, it's like allowing like accessory structures that aren't retaining walls to be higher than the actual retaining wall makes sense in my opinion.
Now, buildings, if you're an accessory structure that is building,
Right.
like it's a detached garage, then you're subject to the height limits of buildings, which
Right.
is more generous.
Mhm.
So we're really just talking about those more simple primitive structures that don't have walls.
Where is a wall?
Or is a wall.
aren't there walls that are put up that aren't retaining? I mean, I suppose it's almost like a fence, except I can think of, people that are putting up walls to block 26.
That would be a structure.
Be structure, okay.
A fence is really a structure.
And we learned last month. can't
So
be
what
over
would
8
the
feet.
screening requirements look like then? Or like, what's an example?
You
Of
could
that.
say, X number of trees and shrubs every 5 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet, something like that. Or for every 50 linear feet of a wall, you must plant this many trees and shrubs, and it has to be a tree that is over 35 feet at maturity or something like that.
Could you make it an evergreen, or can we get us that strict? Just curious.
You could make them evergreens. I don't know that I would, because part of what we're trying to preserve in the mountains is the natural plant
The
community.
color, yeah.
And we don't have a ton of native evergreens in our natural plant communities. Pretty much it's some pines, and they're not the best.
Yeah, no,
They
that's, yeah, that's true.
Hemlocks would be wonderful, but they suffer from disease right now, so they're not doing well.
Well, unless we're voting on, or recommending a specific change, don't we need to decide on whether we're gonna support this as is?
Yeah,
I think they're just items for discussion, right?
Yeah, we're just, once we're done with discussion, then we can, do you got anything else to add?
No, just discussing what the items for discussion were, that's all.
All right, so
So I'm sorry. So on the subject of revegetation and screening, the last item of discussion has to do with there's a standard, it's a very kind of squishy standard in our code right now that refers to revegetating artificial slopes. So imagine a road cut in, or somebody builds a retaining wall and there's a big cut bank or a filled bank. And it just says that you have to plant it and revegetate it to be consistent with the natural plant community, but it's not a very objective standard. So this is another one where Adrian and I discussed, should we ask for a certain number of trees and shrubs for a certain square footage? We even consulted with some landscape architects to ask them if there was a replanting standard that they would recommend. And they couldn't really quite come up with one because different conditions would warrant a different approach. So we just kind of left it for now, but it's just one of those things that maybe we just want to keep thinking about.
Yeah. It sounds like that's a pretty hard thing to kind of like put in writing, depending. But it'd be cool if we could do something like that.
Any other thoughts?
Not for me.
Not for me. This goes to the commissioners anyhow, right? So.
It does, but we'll take the feedback that you have provided
Right.
and.
No, but we're not the final say, is what I'm saying.
I provided a suggested motion on your staff memo, if you feel so inclined.
If somebody wants to do that.
I'm trying to find that, oh, here it is. Dylan, you want to do it, or you want?
Go for it.
I move that the Town of Woodfin Planning Board, having considered its proposed ordinance amendments in relation to the comprehensive plan and finding the proposed ordinance amendments to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, recommend approval of the proposed ordinance amendments to the Board of Commissioners. You have to
A second that.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, let it be. All right, and with that concludes all of our business. Awesome. Unless there's anything else, we'll go ahead and adjourn our meeting and need a motion to do that.
Oh.
Motion to adjourn.
I second it.
Awesome. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So be it. I feel official when I say so be it.
Good work, Adrian and Shannon.
Yeah, I think that was good, y'all.